So you probably just heard the recording button now. And we would love to see you all, because seeing your faces is helpful to know how the work is landing with folks. So please turn on your camera if you can, but if for whatever reason you need to turn off your camera, we totally understand. It's whatever helps you digest this information. And then we also know that many of you are still either working from home or watching these webinars from home. So just know that your kids, creatures, pod, and or housemates are absolutely welcome in the space. And then have something to take notes on and process your thoughts if that's important to you and that, helps you retain information. As always, I like to open up these spaces with a small invitation to each of you. And I'm always going to read through them. So the first one is to listen deeply while we're together, embrace and notice discomfort or tension. And when you do notice them, explore why you might be feeling those. Take risks. The phrase that I like to use here is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We know that these systems of injustice weren't built in a day, and so it's going to take practice to dismantle them. And then finally, hold each other with compassion. Social justice work is a practice, and it's something that we're all working at daily, and mistakes might be made along the way. And so with that, I'm excited to move right on in and introduce the amazing Cedra. Cedra is a manager with Black Girl Freedom Fund. She is an amazing athlete, just need to say that. But she also was an executive leader at a social justice youth organization for over 20 years, an auntie, a runner, a creator, whose imagination is fueled by the arts, travel, and learning from others. And I also would love to introduce Maheen. Maheen is the VP of Programs and Operations for Grantmakers of Girls of Color. She has over 2 decades of experience advocating for girls of color who have been impacted by interpersonal and state violence, with a particular focus on survivors of child sex trafficking and child sexual abuse. These 2 women are total amazing badasses, and I'm really excited for a very interactive session with them both today. So with that, I'm going to pass it right to Maheen and Cedra.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. I know Lizzo certainly gave me the energy boost that I needed. Our offices were closed yesterday as well as the day before, so we are kind of on a middle of the week / Monday vibe. So we hope that you all can bear with us and are just really excited to be in community and conversation with you all so that we can strategize together and learn together. And we are really hoping that this can be an interactive conversation. And also, I am certainly one of those people who loves to sometimes just kind of tune out and listen and absorb. So please show up in the ways that feel right and useful for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about, Cedra and I are going to share a little bit more about Grantmakers for Girls of Color and the 1 Billion for Black Girls campaign and kind of how we're coming to this conversation today. Share with you a little bit of the wisdom that we have been receiving from young people in our community through our participatory grant making and other efforts to engage Black girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth in our grant making practices. We're going to take a break, and then we're actually going to have you engage in some of the participatory grant making practices that they engage in so that you can get a sense of sort of what young people that come into our community are experiencing. And also, we're super excited to hear kind of what you take from that experience and all of that. So, and then we have some exciting announcements at the end that we would love for you to share with your communities related to some grant making opportunities that we actually have coming up. But all of that to say that we are really excited to be in conversation. Please ask your questions as they come up. We will do our best to answer them in real time, and or there'll certainly be time at the end for more Q&A as well. So with that, we can get started if we want to go to the next slide. So as Kelsey mentioned, we are with Grantmakers for Girls of Color. Our mission is to mobilize and amplify transformative organizing work that is led by and centers girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth of color to dismantle systems of oppression in the US and beyond. So that's a very long way of saying basically that all of our work is really centered on girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth. And I will note actually that when G4GC started, we did not have Femmes and gender expansive youth in the actual mission statement. And it's actually young people and their expansive and more nuanced and sophisticated analyses of gender that have invited us to have more expansive language in our work. So you'll see it, it's long, it's wordy, and it's important because as our young people consistently name for us, they need to see themselves in the work in order to know that it is for them. So we do a number of things, including we are a funding intermediary, so we raise money to re-grant it. We have 4 initiatives that I'll share more about. We do a lot of kind of what some folks call capacity building, other folks call accompaniment, other folks call technical assistance, but basically we try to show up for our grantees in a range of ways that really is about them and the young people that we're supporting, seeing a philanthropic home for girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth of color, and kind of undergirding that the idea that each one of us can be a co-investor in this work. So we see young people as co-investors because they are giving their wisdom and their time and their labor and they're organizing in communities. We see organizations that are creating villages and networks of support around them as co-investors. And we see folks who have financial and other resources, the people that volunteer for those organizations, the staff at those organizations, and the people funding them as co-investors. Because of that, we also do participatory learning and distribution of scholarship. So the idea is that we're building out a research arm that can basically do the philanthropic research that kind of flanks movements and organizations and gives them the information that they need in order to mobilize and organize resources. As part of that advocacy and organizing, we also do some advocacy in narrative and policy, and not in your sort of, obviously we're a grant-making institution, we don't do direct lobbying, but we do kind of make sure that our grantee partners and young people are in community with cultural influencers and policymakers to make sure that when they're thinking about advancing social justice and civil rights efforts, that girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth of color are in the room. So a good example of that is at one point when this administration launched some initiatives around equity, the White House Gender and Policy Council reached out to us and we were able to organize some listening sessions amongst our grantee partners and them to make sure that as they were thinking about equity initiatives, we were able to make sure that young people, and particularly girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth of color, were influencing some of those strategies in very concrete and specific ways. And then the last piece, which is kind of why we're here today, is the philanthropic education and organizing, which is really building community with other people who are thinking about resourcing this work, are already resourcing this work, are excited to resource this work, and figuring out how we can all kind of collaborate together. Most of our staff are newer to philanthropy as an industry as it stands, but as we know, that's not new to philanthropy because it's actually in our bones and our ancestors and our communities. And part of that is because we wanted folks who come with a deep proximity and to the communities that we're resourcing, to girls of color in particular, and to understanding what it means to actually be an organizer and mobilize people towards change. We can go to the next slide. So I don't think in this group I have to name this, but I think it just helps you to understand kind of how we came about. So why girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth of color, and really why does G4GC exist? And the reason is because movements and organizations asked us to exist. So around 2014, 2015, there was a lot of activity in the field. There were a lot of really amazing participatory reports that were coming out. There was action at the federal, state, and local levels to really invest broadly in young people of color, but it was very focused on men and boys of color in some of the more public-facing, particularly initiatives coming out of the federal government and state and local governments. And there were many people at the same time. There was this like kind of burgeoning, really mass of organizations that were led by Black and other women and girls of color that were already mobilizing and organizing together. And so G4GC was really kind of came together as a funder learning community initially to respond to the call to action from those movements that was, we need to mobilize philanthropic investment, and we need to make sure that girls of color are not left out of conversations more broadly about investment in resources. And so it was a funder learning community. We then did research with young people, with executive leaders, with other folks in philanthropy to figure out why was there an underinvestment and what was happening and how could we make it more aligned with what movements were asking for. So that report, which was led by Frontline Solutions, and we can share links to that report either now or later, but that specific report for me really highlighted a couple of very specific things that are important in terms of understanding G4GC and why and how we do our work. The first was that, unsurprisingly, there is an underinvestment in women and girls of color more broadly. The most recent research, obviously, that many folks have probably seen is from the Ms. Foundation's Pocket Change report, where they reported that less than 0.5% of philanthropic giving annually was going overall to women and girls of color. And that's not separating it out by age, it's not separating it out by community. And then when you break down what that looks like for specific communities, obviously that's less and less funding. The second piece that really came out of the research was that even when there was an investment, it wasn't going to what young people were saying they wanted. So there might have been some investments in education, for example, but they weren't going towards the things that girls of color were saying they needed in schools to feel safe, to feel whole, to have educational opportunities. And then the third, which I think was really the most exciting finding, was girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth of color wanted to be funded at the intersections of their identities. So if we go to the next slide. Sorry, Kelsey, we're asking you to do a lot of things all at once. These are some of the things that they said they wanted to be funded at the intersections of, not just where they were from, but really specifically what their neighborhood was. Obviously the intersections of race and ethnicity and gender identity, but also them saying, I'm smart, I'm funny, I'm shy, I'm creative, I'm moody. And so our call to action was really, how do we resource them at the intersection of the fullness of who they are? And how can we create philanthropic strategies that see them for their whole beings and encourage and inspire investment in that, as opposed to a specific issue area or a specific kind of deficit-based strategy, which is what we have often seen. And I will speak frankly, because you all are folks in philanthropy that are doing this work, a lot of times people want us to lead with the deficit of what are all the terrible things that are happening to them. And of course, we know that they're battling many systems of oppression. But for us at G4GC, it's really important that people are actually inspired by their leadership and their capacity to thrive, and inspired by all the things that they are able to do and the things that they see in themselves, and not just coming from a place of deficit. We can go to the next slide. So we have 4 funding initiatives at G4GC, and Cedra is going to talk about our largest one and most public facing one. But we have the Love is Healing Fund, which I will say a little bit more about, only because we did not initially intend to be an intermediary. As I shared, we were a donor learning community, but after that research came out, it really prompted us to think about what our strategy needed to be. So in 2019, we spun out. We were initially housed kind of at the Novo Foundation and led by a number of other foundations. In 2019, we spun out to be a fiscally sponsored project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And so as you can imagine, it's April of 2020. Dr. Monique Morris, now Dr. Monique Kuvson, she's changed her name, has came in April of 2020 and was sitting on seed funding. And the question was really, do we sit on this and build what we initially intended, or do we look at the world around us? And we knew that girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth of color would not receive the kind of COVID-19 response dollars that other larger institutions might be receiving. And so we launched a COVID-19 response fund, which was our first community of grantees. The grants initially ranged from anywhere from like $1,000 to $25,000. And they were across a range of issues and communities. Since then, that's become our general fund. We also have 3 other specific initiatives. One is the New Songs Rising initiative that was launched in partnership with 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. And it is a fund that specifically focuses on Native and Indigenous, like diasporic Indigenous girls. The third initiative is the Holding a Sister initiative that we launched in partnership with the Black Trans Fund. So you'll see that I see some of our other funding intermediaries on the call today, like Third Wave and Women's Foundation for the state of Arizona. We do a lot of partnering with our colleague, particularly women and femme of color led intermediaries, because there is a lot of rich organizing that happens in those spaces. So New Songs Rising was launched with 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. The Holding a Sister initiative was launched in partnership with the Black Trans Fund, specifically to support trans girls and gender expansive youth of color. And then the Black Girl Freedom Fund, which Cedra will talk about in a second, but just to say that there are obviously so many intersecting identities that live across all of these initiatives. The idea behind them is to really be a container for conversation. So for example, with New Songs Rising, it's how do we create a specific place where we can talk about resourcing Indigenous girls? What does indigeneity mean? What are they asking for? And so the strategies for that fund are actually quite different than the strategies for Love is Healing or the strategies for Holding a Sister. And that we're doing those in partnership with intermediaries that are led by folks with those identities and in those communities, in addition to staffing up our institution in a way that reflects the communities that we are supporting. And the last thing I'll say before I hand it over to Cedra to talk about the Black Girl Freedom Fund is really that we, across all of these, are creating a youth engagement strategy that puts young people in decision-making across our policies, our grant making, our communication. So for example, we are thinking about things like launching a TikTok for G4GC because young people have told us that that's how they want to be reached, or our participatory grant making. We have a child safeguarding policy that we've developed that young people actually had a say in articulating and defining, not only for us, but again, going back to how we think about our work being reciprocal, really as engaging in ways that ensure that we are collectively sharing wisdoms, not only with the young people that we engage with, all of whom are from our grantee community. That's where we source the and kind of outreach to young people, but also that we're sharing back that information and creating avenues for our grantees to share that information with us and for us to share it back with them. I think I have one more slide before I hand it over to Cedra, so we can go to the next slide. And yes, I won't read this whole thing, but you'll have access to the slides, I'm sure. But it is important to us that we ground every conversation in what we call reciprocity as praxis. So as we were thinking about what is this institution that we could build that could be a home, it was really important to us that we actually led from this place. And so I'm actually going to invite you all to do some thinking, because the idea behind reciprocity as praxis is really the idea that all of us come from philanthropic traditions in our homes and in our communities, and that those philanthropic traditions can actually influence the way we do our work and the way we show up for our grantees and for young people in our communities. And the idea then is that the exchanges that we engage with are not all financial, and this allows for us to be in relationships that are less transactional. That are less rooted in the power that comes from an exchange of money, but is really about how we all come together again to be co-investors in what we call the just and liberated futures for girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth of color. So I will actually pause and invite each of you, and if folks do want to share, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we'll maybe come back to it and ask you to share at when Cedra is done presenting. But one thing that we do often, and we'd love to invite you to do this, is think of one person in your life that has influenced your own philanthropy. A person, it could be a person, it could be a cultural tradition, it could be a story or an anecdote, but something that tracks from your own personal, whether it's your family, your cultural tradition, your neighborhood, something you saw growing up that has influenced your philanthropy. So maybe I'll tweak this a little bit, Cedra, and turn it to you. And then maybe at the end of this section, if folks want to, you can share. And the example that I'll give is, I was raised in a Muslim household, and we have the concept of zakat, which is the philanthropic giving that every Muslim is required to give every year. And it's rooted in an idea of being mutually accountable to yourselves and your communities, particularly if you have access to financial and other resources. And so for me, that comes up. Sometimes I answer with an aunt of mine who is very philanthropic, but I'll pause there, hand it over to Cedra, and ask you all to be thinking about that person or that entity or that idea in your life that's influenced your own philanthropy. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll pass it to Cedra.
Thank you so much, Maheen, and thank you, Kelsey, for the invitation. And folks for coming through. Again, my name is Cedra Sebastian. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be here in this conversation. My voice might feel very small, and it's because I've been doing a lot of screaming over the weekend. Kelsey alluded to my running. And so crossed the major finish line on Sunday, my first 60K ultra trail run. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of screaming at the finish line. So my voice is small. So if you're having a hard time hearing me, definitely turn up your volume. And also want to give a shout out to folks who are here in this moment, looking at the chat. Literally from A to Z, it's an international conversation, right? So folks from Agua Caliente to Zimbabwe joining on today, and that is just filling me that folks are making the time to be present for this important conversation that is centering equity and justice. Often that is not a conversation that happens in philanthropy. When it does, at least for me, it feels like it's a little spark and then people move on to something else. And so it's good to see we have, folks from all over who are thinking about different ways that we are putting into practice the work of equity and justice. When I think about a person who has influenced my philanthropy, lots of people come to mind, but somebody who's sitting with me right now is my mom. And so my mom was a social worker for a number of years and is coming on 9 years of retiring from that work. And when we were growing up, before she was doing social work and case management work for the city, we moved to New York from Puerto Rico in the early 80s and didn't have a whole lot. And somehow my mom always managed for us to do like 2 or 3 times a year to go through all of our things and to figure out what we were giving away. And I will admit that it was really hard when I was younger because I didn't want to give none of my stuff away. And the lesson that I learned as I got older is even when we think we don't have enough, we actually have enough for ourselves and for others. And she is really the person who put that seed in me at a very young age of what thinking from a space of abundance can look like, that there's actually enough for me to sustain myself and share with others, right? That even when I'm looking at the little that I have, and it was little, right? That we can still make a way to support someone else who doesn't have right now, or is in dire need, right? And so that first seed of what abundance could look like came from my mom. And that is definitely one of the things that has grown in me as I'm now doing this work in philanthropy. And so wanting to give you all some key notes around reciprocity as practice and how that connects to Black Girl Freedom Fund and the larger campaign that is connected to, which is 1 billion for Black girls. And so the 1 billion for Black girls campaign was founded in the summer of 2020 at a time when there were lots of conversations that were happening in different spaces, including philanthropy, about what a more just US could look like as it relates to racial reckoning that we were seeing. However, there were very few public conversations that were happening about the intersections of race and gender, and also what this means for young people as well. And Maheen talked a little bit about that earlier. And so a group of women who have been doing really amazing work in the areas of activism and academia and the arts had their amazing text thread that was the space where they were unpacking all of the things that were happening and decided we need to make a bold call to action to say that this is actually the moment to invest robustly in the present day experience and the futures of Black girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth. And so the call was for a $1 billion investment in Black girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth in their families from 2020 to 2030, that there would be this 10-year-long campaign where we would act and move and mobilize individuals, corporations, institutions, and philanthropy to robustly invest in Black girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth. And the women who co-founded that campaign, all of their names are listed there on the slide. And you might, I'm sure you know some reference to all of them because of your connections to philanthropy, but also the justice work that you've been doing. And so it was really important for us to do our work within the G4GC community to lift this campaign as well. And that's where Black Girl Freedom Fund came into play. And if you go to the next slide, Kelsey, telling a little bit about Black Girl Freedom Fund. And so since the campaign kicked off in 2020, we've been able to do some really cool things. And I'll speak more in detail about that as we move on. But in addition to being a vehicle that has resourced nearly 80 organizations since our grant making process has kicked off, we've also been able to engage young people, Black girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth themselves in a participatory grant-making process. One of the things that Kelsey said earlier was, a guiding principle for this session around listening deeply. And I had to write it down because it just made me feel tender, and thinking about all the times when I'm with Black girls and gender-expansive youth and they talk about how often they are not listened to. And the frustration that comes with that. And also like recognizing that people are missing out, that people are missing out on brilliance, on creativity, on innovation, because they are not listening to them, because they're not listening to Black girls and gender nonconforming Black youth. And it also made me think of how this participatory process has been one of those ways where we're not only deeply listening to them, but we're also doing what they say, right? Because it's one thing to deeply listen to someone, and then it's another thing to take heed to what they say, and that shift your actions, right? Shift your day-to-day, maybe cause some disruption in a process that you're used to moving forward, because you've listened so deeply, you cannot let that new information go. You then have to move it and put it into practice. And so working with the young people over these few cycles has definitely been an opportunity for me to do that, but also an opportunity for other folks who are part of our community to do that work alongside young people as well. And so they're with us for about a 2-month period where they are paid for their work to learn about philanthropy, learn about how Grant Makers for Girls of Color does philanthropy, and then to do the vetting work. We have had 2 cycles of grant making that has come together so far. We'll share an announcement toward the end of this about other work that we have coming through. But in that time, young people are thinking for themselves about what philanthropy means for them. And in the similar question that Maheen asked us, they're also asked a similar question. And it's interesting to hear the range, right? Sometimes young people refer to a practice within their Indigenous community and culture. Sometimes folks talk about a susu, which is a type of way of like sharing resources over a period of time in a closed community group, right? Sometimes people talk about volunteering, about donating, about, tithing if they go to a church, and all of these are like different examples of giving. One thing that stands out to me as a young person talking about making a connection to philanthropy, thinking about how her community holds a family who has lost a loved one, and how then the community comes in to cook food, to make sure that the family is well, to run different errands, from like washing clothes to taking care of elders or younger people in the family, so that the immediate family can mourn and feel supported as they're going on to do that work, and how that is connected to philanthropy, right? Showing love and kindness, compassion, through resources, and those resources obviously can be dollars, but also can be time. And so in this grant making work with Black Girl Freedom Fund, we are talking about the giving of dollars and that being the major philanthropic work. And it's something that they get really excited about. And we support them in thinking about what that work can look like by also connecting them to a social worker, psychologist who facilitates workshops around understanding their relationship to money. And we know that that's important because even in our adulthood, we might not have had those opportunities to talk about what our relationship with money is, what it has been, and how that informs the work that we do in our day-to-day. And so it's really a great opportunity for the young people to have that space to pause and think about what their relationship to money is, because they're going to be in this very unique position of being able to resource an organization. And it can be difficult to say yes or no. It can be difficult to ask the question that might eliminate someone from a process, but it's one that they really dig into and do the hard work around together. The young people are constantly asking questions. They are asking me questions all the time. They are asking our guest questions all the time. When Maheen joins us for sessions, they have tons of questions for her. They're questioning each other. And they're also coming together to co-create what the vetting process will be for a particular round. So as an example, one of our rounds was focusing on organizations that were centering the wellness and safety and health of Black girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth. And so they took time to define what wellness means for them, what safety means for them. And you would imagine it's not what you would find in Merriam-Webster. And so that was what led our criteria, right? Not so much what you could Google as a definition, but for them, what made them feel safe, what made their communities feel safe, what did they need to feel healthy and whole? And it ranged, right? So all of those things we put into our decision-making process. And then for about 4 to 5 weeks, the young people had access to a docket that had all the organizations that submitted viable applications. We were very clear about what we meant by centering Black girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth, that it needed to be an organization that was a 501c3 or was housed at a 501c3. It couldn't be for individual scholarship or for re-granting or for somebody's individual business. And so off the top, any applications that came in that were outside of that initial criteria, I removed them, put them in the folder so the young people could see the name still, but could understand like why they were not going to be considered. And then we went about looking at the ones that met that top tier criteria, and the young people went through their decision-making process to determine which organizations would receive fundings and which would not. And for these grant-making cycles, the grant amounts range from $5,000 to $100,000. And that depended on the scope and the work of the organization, their size and their budget and other factors. And so I think if a young person was here, they would talk about the experience being cool. I think they would also say it was a lot of hard work. I think all of them would say they would want to do it over and over again, and that they would tell their friends, and they have, which is how our pool of cohorts has grown, because they are telling their friends from other after school programs that they're a part of, or from their sports team, the work that they're doing. They're telling their neighbors, I'm a philanthropist, and explaining to them what that work has been. And so the work that they have done has not only moved our work forward at G4GC, but it's definitely also inspired other people in their peer communities. So what we're going to do now is create a way for young people to enter into this space. Oftentimes we talk about young people, but we don't talk with them. We don't necessarily do the deep listening. And so we're going to be sharing a small clip from a video that was a part of our annual Black Girl Freedom Week. Black Girl Freedom Week is an annual celebration that's an opportunity for us to celebrate Black girls, Black femmes, and Black gender-expansive youth. It's also a call to action to let folks know about the 1 Billion for Black Girls campaign, and also to provide an opportunity for young people to showcase who they are, to talk about their communities, to talk about all the amazing things that they're doing and all the things that they want adults to do on their behalf. So Kelsey is queuing that up. It is a conversation by two new philanthropists, Jameson Ford and Zoe Tripp, and we'll cue it up now. Learn and how we get to grow alongside them. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jamison Ford and I use any pronouns. And I had the amazing opportunity to work on the Black Girl Freedom Fund Youth Advisory Board. The first thing I actually did was learn about philanthropy and actually get to put myself in a philanthropist's shoes. When you're growing up, you never imagined, I never imagined somebody like me working in philanthropy, right? I always imagined men in suits and ties sitting at a big table. And my personal experience working with Black Girl Freedom Fund was so far from what I actually imagined. After learning about how decisions were made and how people allocated money and how all the specifics of philanthropy work, I actually got to work with people that looked like me and got to learn about organizations that served and were led by people that looked like me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Zoe, you up next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe Tripp, she, her pronouns, and I'm super excited to be joining you all in conversation today. My work in philanthropy extended to joining the G4GC grant maker for girls of color, women of color board, in which I work with other girls such as me, and we work on creating work surrounding philanthropy and like shaping what philanthropy looks like for us. I think what's been so exciting and like so rewarding for philanthropy for me is like not only producing philanthropy like the corporate level as far as grant making, but like noticing that you can do philanthropy within your community with not having like a huge lump sum of money. And that means like just the ability to like give back to others by sharing food, sharing love, sharing words, affirmations. And that's been like the most rewarding part is I can spread love and philanthropy even if I'm not some big corporation.
Yes, spreading that love. Kendall?
Hi, everyone. So good to be in this virtual space together. Again, my name is Kendall Clark Oshibadu, and I have the immense privilege of working with our young people across G4GC, both in our grant making, but also in our internal work as well. So it's been such a blessing and a privilege to be able to work with people through our social media, through our operations, through our communications. And I'm just so excited to be having this conversation tonight. With that, I believe I have the first question. Jamie, you are a leader with the Black Girl Freedom Fund Youth Grantmaking Council. When it comes to investment and philanthropy, what is important for people to know about Black girls and gender-expansive youth?
So something that was said to me a long time ago was, "We keep us safe." And it's always stuck with me, and it's stuck with me throughout my philanthropy experience. When it comes to philanthropy, Black girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth, we come last when it comes to investment, whether that be asking who needs investment or the actual investments themselves. And we're not even asked what kind of investments that we actually need for our communities. So who's better to ask than us?
Yeah, absolutely. Who better to ask than you all?
I wanted to hop in and say I definitely agree, Jamie. To add on with you were saying, I think the most important thing about Black girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth and philanthropy right now is that not only is that just asking what our needs are, but also taking a step further and pushing them well and see like what a true investment looks like. And typically what that means right now is like a loss of power or a shift of power distribution. I think so often power distributed to like adults or who are asking our needs, but I think in order for our needs fully met, like self-actualization to occur, Black girls and fans and jerks need to shift the power. I think beyond these boards is definitely what that looks like. Because now we take like a leading role in what we need, and we get to make decisions and not want someone making decisions for us.
Yeah, thank you both, Zoe and Jamie. What's sitting most and resonating most with me is about what both of y'all are saying around shifting power to young people, about the fact that we keep each other safe. We know that traditionally philanthropy as a sector is extractive, right? When we think about it as a sector and as an industry, we know that it is often rooted in the land grabs and genocide of Native Indigenous peoples. We know that it is rooted in and fueled by historically by the enslavement of African descendant peoples, of extractive industries all around the world. We also know that it is rooted in often the exploitation of women's labor. And so it's really exciting to think about and acknowledge that philanthropy is actually ancestral. While we think of philanthropy in the industry as top down, philanthropy is actually core to who all of us are, to our communities. It's interesting, in the last panel, just a little while ago, we learned and witnessed about who is funding Black girls, right? And we know that historically Black women are the folks who are funding this work abundantly. And so it's really exciting to think about the beautiful work that Black Girl Freedom Fund is able to do as part of really building on that legacy of Black feminist leadership. And it's really beautiful to be able to witness the work of folks like Jamie and Zoe, who are able to both fund and invest in their peers and also build community with each other.
So
Thank you so much for sharing that clip, Kelsey.
Thank you, Kelsey. So we can go to the next slide. And I know, Kelsey, you're managing so many things. So I want to just pause for a minute and invite folks, if you're not feeling shy, to come off mute and share kind of what's coming up. Like, what did you hear in that conversation? What felt exciting to you? What was surprising to you? Or if you'd like to come off mute and share a little bit about the ancestral philanthropy that you come from. Cedra and I have been talking for a minute, and we'll share more about what we heard from young people, but would love to know what you heard from Jamie and Zoe, who, as Cedra said, like, Jamie was like, you need an alumni council. These are all the plans that you have. Jamie has been a very hardcore recruiter for the Black Girl Freedom Fund and for reclaiming philanthropy as a practice. And Zoe continues to lead in a lot of different ways as well. And so I just want to honor their leadership and also know what you heard from them, because I know they would be excited. They're always like, did you show the clip? Tell us what people are thinking. Tell us what people are saying. So and if this hadn't happened during school hours, we may have invited them as well to be here with us.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hop in and break the ice because as someone who used to work with youth, I think what I'm really sitting with from that clip is one, the wisdom that they all had, but then two, just how far ahead they are than traditional philanthropy. They have, like, clearly, like, they know the ancestral piece. They know what radical philanthropy looks like. And there's just clearly so much that folks can learn from them that it just really warms my heart and gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelsey. Jerry, I see your raised hand.
I want to say thank you first and foremost. And my computer has a real attitude problem, so please forgive me if I get a little sketchy, but I'm so moved by everything, right? To hear those young people, and even to use an identifier at such a young age as a philanthropist. I mean, I love everything about it, you know? And you talk about the time, talent, treasure. How can we help move your messaging forward? I'm just really, really proud. Even though I have nothing to do with this, it's just really good to hear, like, we're all like hitting this at different levels. So we're all trying to advance this movement forward, and we're all doing it by different leverages. And just to hear young people speak about the advancement of philanthropy and Black philanthropy, and our responsibility for our communities, where it's rooted, where it's going. I'm here for it. Let me know. Sign me up for the Black Philanthropy Jubilee. I'm here.
Thank you for sharing, Jerry. Yeah, and I also see that Deb wrote inside the chat as well. Folks can also share their thoughts in the chat. Yeah, for me, it's something. I hear you on, you don't have anything to do with it. And also we all have something to do with it. And so just at that moment when I was thinking about that, I saw Deb's comment that they have a youth-led grant making process. And so that's wonderful to hear too. You know, one of the things that came up early on in the 1 Billion for Black Girls campaign and Black Girl Freedom Fund was, you know, how are people going to see themselves connected to the work, right? Because we're not going to raise $1 billion with just Black women, for example, giving, or Black folks giving only. It really is going to take everyone to see themselves as connected to this effort to do this giving. And so that's one of the things that I hold on to, and one of the things that I share with people who are coming to the work and want to invest and are thinking about the best way that they can be a co-investor in this fund. One of the things that stands out to me when I hear Jameson and Zoe talk is, well, some context, because at the time that we were recording this, it was after school hours. But where Zoe was at was like a cyclone alert and her internet was going in and out. And where Jameson was at was sitting on the floor of the locker room in her school because she had just gotten out of a volleyball game. They had just gotten out of a volleyball game. So these are young people with busy schedules, interesting lives, pending shutdown of electricity, who held the time to be present, to be a part of that conversation. And so I want to share that because it speaks to the seriousness that they've taken the work, right? And you talked, Kelsey, about like, oh no, Jerry was saying their identifier of philanthropists, right? That at such a young age that is now an identifier that they have for themselves is so often. And Jameson says, you know, who better than us to ask about where the investment goes? And Jamie's right. Again, so often young people are not asked, and if they are, they're not listened to about where investment should go in their communities. Zoe talks about, you know, what a true investment looks like, right? And to be able to have the space and the time to dream about with other young people, with adults who get it, what a real investment looks like, and to be able to name that and know that there's a whole community of folks who will move in that direction because they were given the time to name it, think about it, explore it, shape it, and then take the lead on it.
Yeah, thank you, Citra. And you know, Deb, I'm really excited we're always excited to talk to other folks that are doing youth led grant making, because I think there's so much excitement and learning, and lots of folks that have been doing it like for a long time. Like I know Third Wave has been doing it for a long time, and I think there are a lot of other folks that have great models around it. And we actually, I will say, like, we talked to a lot of those folks. We talked to Frida Young Feminist Fund. We talked to a lot of folks that had already done it, because we wanted to make sure that we were building off our collective wisdom around what it means. The two things that I'll share. And then I'm actually going to pause here, Betty, and allow you to join our conversation, and then I'll come back.
Well, it was very exciting to me to sit and listen to what these young girls had to say. And the thing I will say to you is, you're going the right way. They connected with me. And I think that they would connect with everyone. I mean, you're looking and saying, you know, it can't just be Blacks who are contributing. That's right, it can't be. But with your approach and with using these very intelligent, very conversant young people, young women who are able to converse and know their stuff, they're going to connect. You just need to get the message out. And I don't know how you're getting the message out. And that's the key, is how do you get that message out to people who are not necessarily philanthropists? But if you can get it out there, you will connect and you will get your money. I don't know how much money you currently have, but you're connecting.
Well, thank you so much for that feedback, Betty. And I think, you know, for us, we are very clear that when we let them lead, then we're excited. It's exciting to know that what we believe is what is true. And I think, to be honest, it's been something that, you know, oftentimes when there's a pooled fund, the first question somebody asks is, well, what do we get out of it? And how much control do we have? And what's the role that we as the donor have in directing the resources? And we're very clear with folks from the beginning that, like, we don't even have necessarily a say. I mean, of course, we do all the due diligence, but beyond the governance and the basic making sure that, like, things are legal and appropriate, we, you know, really do defer to their leadership around it. And so it's exciting to know that that is inspiring for other people. We believe that it is. I do want us to have time for a quick break, and I will ask the rest of you to continue to think about who your ancestral and existing philanthropic guides and mentors are. And when we come back, we're going to do a fun activity where you actually get to engage in some participatory grant making the way they do. But I do want to say one thing, which is Cedra mentioned the piece around the healing work and the healing support that we offer to them. It's also work that we internally have done. And I offer this because it was the guidance that was given to me when I entered philanthropy by a very dear mentor and co-founder of G4GC, Tanisha McHarris, who said, you know, you have to heal your relationship to money if you're going to be a steward of resources, because it is going to show up in ways you don't anticipate. And because of that wisdom, we were able to make sure that they have space for it, because there is the very real reality of having proximity and access to resources that other people in your community do not. There's a reason that we give the young people a choice as to how public they want to be about their identity as folks who are part of the Black Girl Freedom Fund, because what we don't want is a situation where they feel targeted or anything else, because we know that communities are facing a lot. And sometimes it might look like you have access to all this money, which might mean that you have money and all of the things that come with that. So I do want to name that it's work that we offer to them outside of our interactions with them, is this healing support, but also to say that, like, it's something that I think all of us can benefit from, is the space to actually unpack those things. And I know that there are folks that lead that work, like Decolonizing Wealth Project and other people, but to the extent that these can be spaces for us to unpack those conversations as well, we've found that it can be really important, especially sometimes when you're resourcing from a very deeply personal place, like where you have, you know, I come from work around ending gender-based violence, like resourcing work as a survivor of gender-based violence for other survivors can bring up a lot of things. And so I just invite us as, you know, folks who are women and femme identified and gender expansively identified in this work, to, like, create the spaces for each other to do that in the ways that we've learned. And our young people have really charged us with, like, we can't do anything without a conversation about healing. Like, we know there's no grant, there's no process, I think this particular generation has been very adamant and militant in a good way about that. And I think it's charging us to think about those things. So I'm going to release us for 5 minutes and invite folks to take the break that you need. And when we come back, hopefully we can have some fun with some participatory grant making and more reflections on the things that young people, that we're hearing collectively about how to move this work forward. Great. So I think we can come back just in the interest of time, and we want to make sure that we have time for the exercise and also for more discussion and questions. Deb, I'm so excited about the makeup of your inaugural group. I know there's some amazing work that's happening in the Twin Cities, and we definitely resource some of that. So it's great to know. We do compensate young people for their time, and happy to connect offline about kind of like the strategies. To be honest, it's been a process to do it through RPA. So we are, just because they're not set up, they're set up for like regular vendors. And so it's been interesting to figure out how we can kind of coordinate with grantee partners to get young people paid, and also to be mindful of what it means to compensate young folks in alignment with different states' child labor laws and all of that. So conversation for a different day, but really excited that that you all are taking this strategy, and excited to be in continued learning with you if you're willing to be. So with that, maybe we can go to the last slide, and I can just say a couple of things before we move to the exercise. But I'll give you a moment, Kelsey, because I know you're managing many things all at once.
The best part was I honestly forgot that I hadn't pulled up the slides again.
All good. So, the one thing that I will say before we jump in is some of the things that we learned from young people about what they were looking for in organizations was really fun. And some of that actually came through the questions they had. So I'll tee it up for Cedra to talk a little bit about how we do this with young people and what this exercise looks like. And then we can go into some of the questions that we'll consider. You're going to be split into breakout rooms. The request is that you kind of self-organize, because that's what they had to do. We were not a part of their kind of individual meetings around how they were unpacking things. So I will pass it to you, Cedra, to talk. Sorry, I did this while your mouth was just started chewing.
It's all good.
But I'm
always eating.
To share a little bit. If I ran 38 miles this weekend, I would also always be eating. So I will pass it back to you to share a little bit about this, and then we'll kick off the exercise.
Yeah, awesome. And so what I end up doing for the young people is creating a practice docket that I call a mock doc or mock docket, because I love words and playing around with words. And we look at that mock doc to think about questions that the young people will have about who the organizations are, do they fit the criteria that they have laid out, and also to give me a sense of like what other information they want about the organization, so that when I'm presenting to them the official docket of organizations for them to consider, they have what they need. We've already fleshed out some things that need to be ironed out because they've gotten a chance to practice based on this activity. And so what the exercise is, as Maheen said, you all will be divided up into breakout rooms, and you'll have a mock docket. None of these organizations exist, although I hope you enjoy some of the people who are involved with the projects, because there's some humor with the names as well. And so it is up to you all to think about whether or not this would be a project that Black Girl Freedom Fund specifically should fund, right? And so thinking about all that you know about Black Girl Freedom Fund and what we shared, would one of the organizations be one that you would fund or not? And so the things to consider: what stands out about each of these organizations? What are some of the considerations you have that might not be listed? What does wellness and safety mean to you? And any additional information you think you would need to make a decision. So those are the questions that we want for you all to consider as you're going through this process. Maheen and I will not be in the breakout rooms because we really want for you to take the time to do this on your own in the same way that I would do with a group of young people from our cohort. I see Kelsey doing what Kelsey does and copying and pasting so that folks can have access to the questions, and there you go. So make sure that you copy it as well so that you have it when you go into your breakout room. So again, you will be split up as we split up young people who are a part of our process to look at these 3 organizations and determine whether or not Black Girl Freedom Fund should fund them.
So I put a link in the chat that is where you can click to see the mock doc. I guess, organize yourselves how you would wish. Take the time, if you decide we each want to take a certain amount of time to read through, I would encourage you to take time to read through them and then come back. And really encourage you to lean into the second part of that question, which is what information do you not have? And perhaps where might you find it if it's not here? Because that's something that also came up for our young people. So we'll give folks, I want us to have time for Q&A. So let's go with like 10 minutes. And if you all need more time, we have space for it, but maybe let's try to come back at like 4:50. So this is not too laborious on your brain at this point in the day.
Yep. Give me 1 second while I am reassigning folks. Okay, so just so everybody knows, we're going into groups of 4, and I will ping you all as you're supposed to come back. Okay, so get ready. Awesome. And you should see a little pop-up saying engage. I'm going to stop the recording.
Colleen actually looks like maybe their feet is frozen. That's great.
All right. So folks should be coming back. Everybody, I think, should be back. It looks like we've lost a few folks, unfortunately, but
Good, it happens, and I know it's close to 5 o'clock.
yes, I'll get my screen share back up for you all. And in we go.
So yeah, would love to know, how was that?
Didn't have enough information.
What kind of information would you have liked to have?
Were the leaders, who the leaders were, who they were led by, who their fiscal sponsor was, how much money we had to fund, to give them, what they wanted to be funded, how much they wanted to be funded with.
Amazing. So like very important questions that that you would need more information about in order to make an informed decision. What else came up?
I'm not sure if the other people in my pod are back, or if you took us back. Did you take us all back?
Yes, we're all together now.
Okay. Maybe it wasn't something we talked about, but just a few minutes later, thinking about, it wasn't always clear where the source of power was.
Within the organization, Colleen?
Within this project or this undertaking, is it with the girls? Is it with the women? Is it with the universities?
So in the project.
Is it with the amount of money itself? Like where is the power to make things happen? Or is it shared? But that wasn't necessarily what we talked about in our group.
It's such an important insight, and I think a question that's very resonant for a lot of the young people when they looked at these.
Yeah, one of the things that came up repeatedly was, so we're making the decision? So we're making this, it's us, are you gonna tell us? And some of it was being in a space where they were used to, if there was an adult, looking to the adult to tell them this is how it was gonna go. And once we got past that, there was less checking in with me about what was happening and what was not happening. In part because they got that I kept saying, it's you. but then they also started to believe that it was them because they were very clear about what the task was at hand. And so I think both allowing them the space to have that question and reminding them of what our core values are as a funding organization, and that it is them having the final decision-making power, things shifted and they stopped leaning towards asking me if this was okay or not, and self-organizing themselves and then telling me what to do or what more information they wanted me to go get for them. Or using things like Instagram, going to people's websites, looking for articles, local news articles, earned media of the organizations to try to figure out what they were doing and if that was matching what they shared in their docket or in their application. Jerry?
1 second, I also heard you just before, and then Jerry, I'd love to invite you to come in. Colleen, I also heard you saying though, like from the descriptions, it wasn't clear where power in the organization lived, not just in the decision making. And so that is really, I think, an important and reflective insight from the young people who often ask, like, who's actually leading this?
Yes.
So thank you for raising that. Jerry, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. I was just, I don't think I worked with Christian and Lorraine. Christian, did I say your name the right way? And yes, I think that, did. Thank you. One of the things, I don't even think, we didn't even bring up power. We looked at the impact of the programming. And the first thing that stood out for us was the fact that the one that was led by the brothers from Princeton, it didn't really show the impact, and it had a $5 million budget. What kind of stood out was that they were all trying to make an impact on communities. And the $90,000 budget actually had an impact of 1,500 young voters. And it didn't resonate for me personally. I'll speak for myself to look at the power dynamic. It mostly looked at the impact of the communities and who they served. But I'll let Lorraine and Christian also tap in.
I love that there are so many different approaches and diverse approaches to like what folks are looking at. And I think it's certainly very true of the things that were coming up for young people. I remember I was in one session where they were like, well, we went to their website and their website wasn't very clear and strong. And that's when they went to social media, because one of the conversations we were able to have is like, how expensive is it to actually have a really nice website for an organization? Yeah. And so there was an opportunity for us to be in learning, and they were like, well, let me go to Instagram because that's free and that's where young people are. So if they're not using social media, then they're obviously not targeting us as an audience. And similarly, I see you all looking at how many young people did they reach as the metric of success, as opposed to how large of an organization were there or how big is their budget? Mm-hmm. Or where did they go to school?
Or where do they go to school? Yeah, that's a great example. And on this question of like, you know, going back to the power question that you had, because power was definitely a theme that kept coming up, not only within the cohort of like who has decision-making power, but also where power lies within the organization, right? How are Black girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth informing programming? How are they centered? How are they in the leadership? Who are the leaders of programming or initiatives in the organization? And for other organization, who's on their board? Who's the CEO? Is it Black femme led? Is it led by queer folks? These were all the things that they were asking about in that power analysis of the organizations as well. And so again, it was a great activity, and one that we do in lots of different ways, because it allows for them to practice asking questions of each other, and then putting to use some of the research skills that they already have, and then learning what other research skills they might need to move forward with the real process when they get a full docket and applications in front of them. It also allows for me to be better prepared to give them what they need, right? So if I'm getting a lot of questions from young people who want more information about the leadership of the organization, then I know that before I finalize the docket that I send to them, I need to be able to highlight across the board, here's all the information that we have about who the leadership is, and make it obvious and apparent. So when they're going through their packets, they're like, okay, this is the leadership section, boom, right? If there are questions that people are having around impact that they can't find, that I can say, you know, here are the websites that didn't get folded in, or you might want to check them out. They're on IG, or they're not on IG, but they're on Facebook. So you can find them here at this Facebook page and fill that information in as well. But it also helps me to get a sense of, you know, kind of where they are at in their learning and what other types of support might be helpful. So when we come back from a debrief and it's the same 3 people that are speaking up, then it's a cue for me to know, okay, I might need to have separate one-on-one conversations with Kelsey and Maheen because they didn't say as much during the group report back. And so I need to figure out if this is just a style and how like their shyness shows up, if this actually wasn't engaging for them, if something else was going on and was a distraction from them being able to fully participate today. That's the other work that I'm charged with doing to make sure that every young person who is a part of the cohort can participate at what optimum participation looks like for them, right? Because for somebody who is shy or who learns differently, a Zoom setup is not the way to go. But if I can create another way for them to connect with me and connect with the rest of the cohort, then they can participate at their optimum and feel really good about the process that they're connected to. Thanks, Cedra.
So I know we're at time, so maybe we can go to this last slide. And, you know, Cedra and I know we did not have enough time for lots of Q&A, but Cedra and I are more than happy to have follow-up conversations or one-on-one conversations. We don't just say that lightly. We really do mean like reach out to us. We're more than happy, especially with folks that are already considering this work and philanthropic colleagues. We love to have those conversations. So please know that the invitation is sincere. The last thing that I'll share, and I'll drop a link in the chat, is that we are actually launching our next round of open applications for this next cycle for the Black Girl Freedom Fund, which will focus on supporting the artistic vision, leadership, artistic vision, innovation,
And
activism of Black girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth. So that is open to any organization that G4GC is not currently resourcing. And so if there are organizations in your community that you know of that would be interested, you know, we aren't the final decision makers, the young people are, but we would love to get that out. And so I'll share the link in the chat and make sure that Kelsey has it. But again, like, deep apologies for not having more time for Q&A, but we are more than happy to continue this conversation, and so grateful for your time, your attention, and your energy. It was really affirming for us because this is an ongoing learning process, and we're really grateful to be in learning with you.
Yeah, and in closing, I'll share 2 things. The answer to your question, Colleen, it's March 31st. That's the deadline for this round of application. And we have a unique opportunity in this cycle to fund youth-led projects. So if they're young people who identify as Black girls, Black femmes, or Black gender expansive youth between the ages of 13 and 25, they are able to apply for a $10,000 grant for a youth-led project. And we will be granting 30 $10,000 grants for youth projects, in addition to our cycle for organizations that are centering the artistic vision, activism, and innovation of Black girls and gender expansive youth. So again, echoing my gratitude. Thank you, Kelsey, for holding us down with all the tech stuff, and look forward to continuing to connect with y'all.
Sorry, and one more call to action I'll just quickly share is that, you know, we are building out the data collection infrastructure for the 1 Billion for Black Girls campaign. Right now, there's no easy way to collect information on what money is going to Black girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth. So in the coming year or so, we'll be launching some invitations for funders who are funding these communities to tell us, so that we can start to track those resources. And I know many of you are, so just be on the lookout for that. And again, as always, if you have more questions or want more information about the campaign, we're more than happy to share it with you. It's really for us collectively to be able to mobilize the resources. It's not something that we feel a lot of ownership around. So thank you, thank you, thank you.